One. Hi, welcome to Naptime Nutrition. I'm Yaffi Lvova, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and owner of Baby Bloom Nutrition and Toddler Test Kitchen. Coming at you a little bit early today because I have fabulous special guest, Chava Lederer, MSc, coming from Israel. So we have a significant time difference, but I just had to have Chava on to cover a topic I've been meaning to cover for a while, which is when parents are coming from a different place, when they have different opinions on how the child should be raised as far as nutrition. And some of these concepts can be generalized to other areas of parenting. So thank you so much, Chava Lederer, therapist in Israel, for joining us. Can you tell a little bit about what your practice focus is?
Yeah, sure. So I am a psychotherapist in Jerusalem in private practice. And really a lot of my practice is post-trauma work and body image and eating disorder work. And because I'm trained in a family systems perspective, what that means is that also takes a lot into account the systems that people are coming in with, including families and communities and other relationships. Yeah, that's what I would say in short.
I think it's really great to have this pairing, much like wine and cheese go well together. Dietitians and therapists go very well together. And especially when you're talking about family dynamic where nutrition is concerned. Dietitians, we know a lot, we learn a lot, and there's a lot of overlap. And when you get into really the dynamic part of it, as opposed to the food part of it, sometimes you'll need to rope in a therapist onto your team. And sometimes a speech therapist or an occupational therapist will also be a valuable addition. So it's really good to know where your resources are and who you should reach out to when you're having these challenges. So very happy to have you today, Chava. Thank you. So first thing, parenting comes in pairs. But sometimes it comes in more than pairs, and we're going to get into some of the more complicated family dynamics. But let's just first start out with parents, two people who are married and have kids together and are living in the same house, and we will get more complex as the segment goes on because not everyone has that dynamic. So sometimes it's more. So what if the parents are not on the same page? Is it okay for parents to have different ideas, different philosophies when it comes to feeding their kids?
So it's a really great question. And I think, like you said in the beginning of this, a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about here is really relevant to other parenting dynamics and other relationship dynamics, because that's going to happen with a lot of stuff. When people come together, there's going to be a lot of differences, and those differences often get really highlighted in raising the kids. So it makes sense that it would come up in food sometimes, at least for some families, where there's different attitudes or different beliefs about nutrition and about feeding. So it definitely will come out. And just similar to other things where parents differ, it's okay. And I think even good, actually, it's really good for children to see that parents can be different, and we can still get along, even if the differences mean that we do things differently and even parent differently.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And I think that it's a valuable opportunity to demonstrate to children respectful dissent, that two people can disagree on a point and still love each other and still get along. That's something that will come up throughout the child's life when they'll disagree with someone. And you can disagree with someone and have a different opinion and still love them, whether it's religion, whether it's politics, whether it's nutrition. So might as well take that tack and appreciate that aspect, because there are challenges to go along with that. But even when you're looking at purees versus baby-led weaning, you can do a combination. A lot of times you'll get the advice from certain professionals, or especially from social media and from media in general, that there is one way to do it and that one way is the right way, and anyone not doing it that way is wrong. And that's not the message that you will ever get from me, and I'm sure that's not the message you'd ever get from Chava. There are different ways to come to a lot of different issues and to parent differently, and it's fine. It's perfectly healthy for the child to see that.
Yeah, no one is raised in or lives, as they grow up and go out in the world. There's no pure environment where they're going, that they need to be exposed, and it's okay to be exposed even from the very beginning to different different attitudes and approaches. And something like that, purees versus baby-led weaning, is really, it's great for the kid to get exposed to both. And even, I'm not the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, but even for a child to be able to swallow purees and solid foods is going to be important. So integrate them all.
Right. And that actually does bring up a valid point that I discussed with Chava Lederer, who is a speech therapist in a different nap time nutrition segment. So if that's something that you're looking at, go back and search the video tab at Baby Bloom Nutrition for that segment, where we talk about how there are benefits to purees and there are benefits to baby-led weaning. And as adults, we also enjoy purees. That's getting off on a different topic. So there's also the topic grazing versus schedule. And sometimes culture comes into that, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But one parent thinks that the child should have a snack on demand, and another parent thinks you should follow a schedule. As a dietitian, I like to encourage a schedule, but I also like to encourage not fighting over food. And so if you have one parent who thinks that you should give snacks throughout the day, but that parent is only present in the afternoons or on the weekends, for example, it's really not that big a deal. So it's not worth having a fight over. When children see their parents having a fight, specifically over food, it introduces a dynamic that can affect that child and how adventurous they are with food, and how they are at the table, how they sit at the table, how much they eat, if they're respecting their internal cues or not. And it's really just not worth it.
Yeah, and the whole environment and attitude around food can become stressful when that becomes a big like a hot point between parents living in the same home. And I think that there's a lot of places where things like that are going to be different. There may be one parent who really follows a very, very clear division of responsibility around meal times, and another parent who it's still very important. They really want their child to eat their vegetables, and so they're pushing for vegetables, or they're insisting that if there's a dessert being served, that it's being served at the end. And so even within a mealtime, it would make sense that there would be different approach that the children are going to be exposed to on a regular basis for some families.
Right. It's also important to realize that picky eating tendencies can come from a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's texture or color. Sometimes there's a sensory issue. But sometimes a child does not want to eat spaghetti because last time spaghetti was served, you fought at the table. Right. And that could be a trigger in and of itself. So it's important to remember that the number one thing is to keep a peaceful environment at the table.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you brought up division of responsibility, and that's something that I really encourage. And just a quick overview of that is just that the parent is responsible for what's on the table and when it's served, and the child is responsible for whether they're eating and how much they're eating. So that we can get that's a whole book. But that's the general idea, and that's the philosophy that's the prevailing child nutrition philosophy at this point. And sometimes we have one parent who's on board with that, and sometimes we have one parent who's not. One parent is allowing the child to be independent with that, and another parent thinks you need to eat 5 bites of chicken and rice, whatever.
Yeah. So
how if one parent finds themselves in this situation where the other parent is not going along with these quote unquote approved philosophies, what is the best way to move forward in that situation?
So ideally, this is something that the parents are having conversations about before mealtime, meaning that these are ongoing conversations, so that both parents are, they're aware and recognizing that this is something that they're not on the same page as, at least now, and maybe they won't be in the future, but so that they can navigate this while each parent, doing their parenting the way that they feel is best or true, and without undermining the others. Meaning, so that might mean that, if they come to a decision about, well, if who's doing the feeding or who's doing the cooking and the serving, and that person, and at that meal, that's the parent who decides how that meal goes. That's for an example, an option. And when the other parent is the one who's responsible for meal time, even if they're sitting together, but then they can do it another way, another time. Ideally, I think there would be an ideal that that one parent is most often doing it, but it doesn't have to be always that way. The other parent can be responsible It's like you said, or the real difficulty would be if parents are arguing about it over the table, or if they're giving very, even if they're not arguing it explicitly, they're arguing about it through the child, about telling you can do this, you can't do this, you have to do this, etc. That would be where it would be really most harmful. And otherwise, navigating in other ways there's a lot of flexibility, I think, for doing different meals different ways. Or
it's very
agreeing.
It's very important to realize that there's more than one way to healthfully feed a child.
Yeah.
So that can, and the important thing, as you said, is not fighting over it or fighting through the child. And that's something that's so common, is fighting through the child. And that's not a dynamic you want at your dinner table or breakfast or lunch, for that matter. Okay.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have cultural differences. Sometimes you have a history where someone grew up in a place where there wasn't a lot of food access, and that can affect how they parent, or that there's something just in the past that that gives a clean your plate mentality, and that can be a real challenge between parents. So what's a way to approach that peacefully?
So I wonder if that's, I'm just as you're saying it, and I'm trying and imagining a situation like that. It also, how much it's talked about or discussed might also depend. Discussed between the parents, obviously, as the more conversation and the more that we can understand where the other person is coming from and come to compromises, the better, obviously. And there might be a point as children go older that there's a little bit of conversation about it at the table, like, mommy grew up in a place where that was really important, and so that's why we're really careful not to waste food, and we're going to do it this way or that way. Or finding, maybe that means that one parent takes more responsibility for finding ways to repurpose, meals, leftovers and stuff, so that it doesn't become a big stressor on the child, that the child is not having to take responsibility, so to speak, for the thing that is difficult for the parents. Or, that cultural stuff that's still sitting there. I think that would be ideally. Obviously, sometimes these things are going to come through, and I think it just comes to my mind now to say this, and it's going to be relevant, I think, in other points that we'll make too. We're not going to be able to protect our children from everything that's, either uncomfortable or maybe not ideal. All our kids are going to grow up with some of our stuff that's still there, and that's okay also, even if it's not ideal. And we're doing our best. And that's for both parents, doing their best to, feed their children with love and making it a family time or a social time, and positive attitudes about it. And if sometimes some of that stuff creeps through, that's also okay. Having faith in our relationships and our kids to be able to grow up anyway.
I really love that perspective. And it's important to remember that with everything, with parenting, one moment does not make a parent. The type of birth that you have doesn't make you a mother, and whether you breastfeed or bottle feed doesn't make you the kind of mother you are. And it's the same at the table, that if some of our historical stuff comes through in the way that we parent our kids, that doesn't shape our entire relationship with our kids. And it's important to remember that, so we can kind of take a step back and chill out about it a little bit. Yeah. So what about when we have a situation where there's divorce and a child is traveling between houses and parents are doing something different?
Mm-hmm. So obviously that can feel like a very difficult situation for the two people involved. I think in some ways there are some things that are going to be a little bit easier, meaning cleaner, in the sense of that it's easier for the contradictory messages not to come up at the same table at the same time. So while, there may be other challenges that are obviously there, that is something to take into account. Like the parent who's feeding at any given time knows that they can really make the environment how they want to make it at that time. And it's really theirs to create. So maybe that's like a silver lining to to the challenges that are going to come up in that situation. And I think that this is also really important, and it's going to happen, in divorced families or separated families. That is going to happen a lot, where there's going to be differences in how they address bedtime or staying up late or screen time or, when socializing with friends. There's going to be so many, obviously, differences in how parenting is done. And it's this similar to how we spoke about when the parents are living in the same house. It's really important that the child not pick up on an undermining attitude that the other parents doing bad or evil or wrong, or trying to harm the child. Like, those are messages that must be avoided at all costs. But that mommy and daddy do different things, and we have different beliefs. And so when you're at my house, we do it this way, and you're at the other house, you're going to do it another way. And both of them, and we both love you, so we're both doing it from, from that place of best interest, and giving over that attitude. That's what's really important.
That's beautiful. So it's much more important to convey an attitude of love as opposed to the details of what and when you're eating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's even true when sometimes we really don't, or that person in the parent in that situation really does not believe, or believes that the way the other person is doing it is really wrong. That can still be, you can still disagree and say, but I also know that daddy or mommy is doing it from a place that they really believe that it's right. And care, we're just doing it differently here. And that, to keep that integrity of the relationships, is really important.
Yeah. And it gets even more complicated when you have step parents, because then they're bringing their own stuff to the table as well, literally and figuratively. So the major thing is just to keep the peace. And unless there's something actually dangerous going on, that's objectively dangerous, and we'll get into that, it's very important to come at everything with love, because the child should not feel the burden of the complicated relationship between the former co-parents. Well, I guess current co-parents.
Yeah, as best possible. I think, all the research says that blended families take years for them to really integrate together. So there is going to be conflict. And again, being able to navigate that as respectfully as possible, as consistently as possible, and knowing that it's sometimes not going to look that way, but doing the best that we can.
Okay, so now let's get into the hard stuff. I did an Naptime Nutrition a long time ago on why you shouldn't put your child on a diet. And that one got a lot of attention because it's a huge issue. And coming from my perspective as a dietitian, and I know your perspective as a therapist as well, we are in the non-diet, anti-diet, intuitive eating, division of responsibility realm of professionals. And so we're not going to encourage children to be on diets. We actually also don't much encourage adults either, but considering the topic, we'll focus on kids. What if you do have a situation where one parent is making harmful comments or instituting harmful practices that are not grazing versus schedule, but are you're done eating because I don't like how big you are and you need to lose weight? How do we navigate that?
Right. So I think that this, obviously it's more sensitive territory for a number of reasons, but it's really, really important for us to take a step back and recognize that every couple, every dynamic, there's going to be their own kind of way that they dance around or through conflict. And this is really when the two parents believe strongly, and it's an essential value of theirs. That's what I'm going to approach this as though that the parent who is, doesn't want to put their child on a diet believes this very strongly, and it's really important for them. It's not something that they want to any leeway on, as opposed to, like you said, the other things that there's more flexibility around. And probably similarly for the parent who is concerned for their child's weight, that's also something that they really believe in very strongly. And so this is going to be a point of real tension that they do have to figure out some way through. And every couple is going to have their own way how they deal with conflict. If there's already patterns of adapting or giving in, and is this going to be different? Who's going to make room for more? Who's going to make more room for who here, etc. Those are already going to be in place. But on the assumption that this is really important to the parent who does not want to put their child on a diet, and that's obviously as I imagine you spoke about in that Naptime Nutrition in the past, that's also medical research supports that we don't we don't put children on diets or even talk about dieting in front of children. So it is really important. And I think that finding ways to navigate that conflict in the relationship is really important. So that's going to be based on a lot of communication skills. For some couples, that might mean making a request of their partner to either read or listen to the most updated research and see if there's any pieces that they can bring on board to lower the temperature on the conflict. Meaning, even if that parent is not going to accept a non-diet or anti-diet approach, that maybe the messaging can be toned down. Maybe that's a possibility, or or finding ways to make comments to refrain from certain kinds of comments, even if they still are concerned for their child's weight. And I think it's also in that communication process, it's also going to be really important to figure out what it is that's bothering the parent who is concerned for their child's weight. Like, what is it that actually is bothering them? Because maybe there are things about that actually the other parent is on board too. Maybe they also want their child to be to be energized and to be getting enough nutrition and to not be so selective about their eating. And maybe there are ways that they can get on board with each other's agenda, that the child be healthier. And maybe that means more activity, or trying to serve more fruits and vegetables, or balanced meals, and finding things that they have common ground on and focusing on those parts. That would be, I would say, maybe I should have backtracked and started there. That would probably be the first place to start.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I also think that depending on the dynamic between the couple, it may not be good to have, it may be good to involve a third party, whether that's sharing, as you mentioned, articles, podcasts, videos from a third party, or even getting in touch with a therapist who could help navigate what the common ground is and how to move forward in a healthy way that may be more gentle than, I read this book, this is what this book says, here's how you have to do it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for a lot of people, in my experience, a lot of people, it takes, and even, I'll just leave that. A lot of people, it takes time for a non-diet or a more neutral body perspective to really sink in. I think that's something, because of the culture that we've all grown up in since the very beginning, it takes a long time for that to sink in. Some people just pounce on it and soak it up, and a lot of people don't. And then, so being patient with that is really important. If you need to bring in third parties, not dragging your partner to, not stuffing books in their faces and not dragging them to, all the professionals that you want, but finding a way that you can see that this is something you both want to do well by your child. And that's what I mean by the common ground. Like, if you both want your child to be healthy and to have the best life. So let's figure this out together, how we can navigate this together.
Yeah, and that's going to look different for each different dynamic, which is something that we discussed before the podcast, or before the broadcast started. It depends on the personalities involved and how they relate to each other and what their history is. So it's good to know your resources.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you think we haven't covered specifically that you think we should discuss?
I don't know. I think maybe bringing back to the beginning, I think one of the things that just came to my mind, because I know something that I've done around the differences around nutrition and meal stuff and body stuff in my own relationship is using a lot of sense of humor. And when I see something, some interesting, some funny meme or comic that kind of brings home the point, but in a light way. I know that works for us, but I think that that's something in parenting in general, when there are things that we differ about, like, remember to, if you can, when you can, use humor. And because some of these things can get really sensitive, remember that this is really about the relationship with each other, whether you're in the same house or not, and a relationship with the child, and really investing in there. That's where the most important energies are.
Yeah. So some differences are fine, even beneficial. And when they get into a little more dangerous territory, we can navigate that in a positive way by remembering that everyone is on the side of the child. So rather than picking sides against each other, you both pick the side of the child and come at it with love. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Chava, for joining me for this. It was a really important topic that people had requested, and I definitely wanted to attack it in the right way with the right resources. And I know that, as I mentioned, this is out of the realm of my training. And when you hit an obstacle, you do want to go to the right person and know what your resources are. So if you're having these obstacles, please feel free to email me, Yaffi@babybloomnutrition.com. I'll help you try to figure out where to go with this and try to guide you toward the right resource. Yeah. So I'm going to do my outro. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for watching Naptime Nutrition or listening to it on the podcast version, as it were. And I've got some stuff going on I want to share. If you want to participate in sending me some love, go to patreon.com/naptime nutrition, and you can contribute to the free and low cost information I've been giving out. And also, if you want to increase your enjoyment at meals, go to amazon.com and look up Beyond a Bite, which is my new book that I just have out. And right now, it's in the e-version only on Kindle, but you can get Kindle app. But I hope in the next few weeks to have a hard copy option for people to buy. I'm all excited about that. I'll send it to you.
So cool. Yeah, it's so cool.
Yeah, it's really exciting. It's 10 activities that bring mindfulness and joy to the table. And this is good for kids who have some picky eating tendencies, or just for parents who want to relate to their kids in a positive way. I mean, sometimes, I'm sure, Chava, you have little kids too. You ask them how their day is, and they give you one-word answers. And
yeah,
it's not conducive to conversation. So these are like conversation-starting activities. Cool. And if you're a Phoenix local, unlike my friend Chava here, who is all the way in Jerusalem, come to Toddler Test Kitchen, currently at the Farm South Mountain, and you can check out dates and registration at toddlertestkitchen.net. So thank you again, Chava.
Thank you so much. This is great.
It's always great having you. And I will be back next week at 1:15 p.m. Arizona time, which is 3:15 East Coast and 12:15 West Coast, and I think it's 10 p.m. in Israel and Wednesday morning in New Zealand, but all around the world you can watch me. So thank you so much, and I will see you next week.